Why do endurance runners need to do sprint training workouts? Well, there's multiple benefits to doing sprint training, so max effort, fast as you can run training for runners who are not going to run anywhere near that speed in their target races, whether they're 5K, 10K, half marathon, marathon runners, or even ultra runners. They're not going to be running their runs or their races at sprinting speed. So why would they want to include sprint training in their training programs? And when they do so, how should they do it? Well, we'll start up with the benefits, like why to do it, then we'll talk a little bit more specifically about how to do it. So in terms of why to do it, there's three main areas that it's beneficial. One is performance, one is injury prevention, and one is overall health. Now, what I'm going to go through here is not a comprehensive list, but it's just an overview of some of the main benefits. So one of the things that it's going to do when you're doing sprint training is that it's going to increase your muscular power. And when you increase your muscular power, which is your ability to express your muscular strength very quickly, that's going to make running at slower speeds easier. When you have more powerful, stronger muscles, running at a slower speed, every step is relatively easier than it would be if your muscles were less powerful and not as strong. So using sprint training to increase your muscular power and strength will actually make your slower running much easier per step, which is going to help improve your running economy. You're going to be able to run at the same speed with less energetic output. The other mechanism by which it does that is it improves elastic recoil or tendon stiffness. So this is where when we land, as we push off each step, about 30% of our propulsive power actually comes from the elastic recoil in our tendons. And the way I like to show people this is if you take one of your fingers and just bend it right back and let it go, it will flick forwards. And that flick, that is elastic recoil in the tendons that's actually flicking that tendon. And it's the same when we run. When we land, as we push off into the next step, 30% of that propulsive power is just coming from that elastic recoil in our tendons. And sprint training helps improve the stiffness of our tendons and improves the amount of elastic recoil that we get per step. Some of the more physiological or cardiorespiratory type benefits are that it increases our anaerobic capacity. And you might be thinking, well, I don't run my marathons in the anaerobic zone, right? I run them in an aerobic zone. And yes, the majority of your training should definitely be in an aerobic zone. But the reason that we do want to have some anaerobic training in our training calendar somewhere is because when we are surging at certain points, whether we're racing or training, there are going to be periods where you're going to have to run a bit quicker or a bit harder, whether we're going uphill or downhill, whether you stumble and lose your footing and you're trying to catch your footing, whether you're trying to pass someone or dodge and get in and out of a few people, whether you just accidentally speed up at certain times, particularly at the start of a race when you're full of energy and you go too fast. When these surges happen, we're burning matches, we're burning through a lot of our fuel. If we don't train our anaerobic system, we'll burn through more during those times. And what we don't want to do, especially when we think of the longer races like half and full marathons, if we burn a load of our glycogen and glucose during those surges, we're going to have less available later on in the race when we really need it. And finally, sprint training, even when you're not running for very long intervals, so you might only be going for 30 seconds or even less sometimes, but definitely less than a minute at an all-out sprint, you still will improve your VO2 max pace. And that can be helpful, obviously, for raising the ceiling on our performance so that we can then raise our other thresholds underneath it. It essentially gives us more room for improvement. So there's some of, not all, but a lot of the important performance benefits, right? So it's going to make us a better long distance runner if we do sprint interval training and we do it well. Now, there are some other benefits in terms of recovering from injuries and avoiding injuries. One of them is that the increase in muscle power that I talked about earlier is going to help better protect our structures. So when we hit the ground, we've got that ground reaction force that's coming back up through our leg, and we have to absorb that. And if our muscles are stronger and more powerful, they will be better able to attenuate those forces, and they will protect the joint surfaces, the cartilage, the meniscus, the tendons, the ligaments, the bones. Those other structures will experience less stress because the more powerful and stronger muscles will protect. Also, a lot of those structures will respond to the sprint interval training themselves and become stronger, more resilient and tougher, particularly the bones. Our bone density is going to increase when we're doing some sprint intervals, and that's going to allow us some protection from things like bone stress injuries, stress fractures, shin splints, and that kind of stuff, which can be very, very troublesome injuries. And finally, the tendon stiffness or the elastic recoil I was talking about earlier. When we are doing sprint intervals, we'll improve our tendon stiffness. That helps protect the tendons. So Achilles tendinopathy and patella tendinopathy, and to a certain degree plantar fasciitis, those tissues will be made stronger, tougher, more resilient by the sprint interval training, and that will allow them better protection. They will be less likely to get injured when we're doing our slow pace running and training. And finally, there's just some straight up health benefits of sprint interval training. So this is more like looking at when they've looked at older people in high intensity interval training. So not necessarily sprint training. It could be like, on an assault bike or an exercise bike doing max effort for, 30 seconds, 60 seconds. But the same principles hold true, that sprint intervals are a type of high intensity interval training, and they will benefit you in the same ways in terms of reducing all-cause mortality. They'll improve memory and brain function. They'll help reduce blood pressure and visceral fat. They'll help increase insulin sensitivity, all the typical stuff that makes you healthier and helps you live longer as a runner. You are going to benefit from those by doing sprint interval training. So a worthwhile investment just purely from a health perspective. I think psychologically for me as well, it's really important. Like as a physiotherapist, a lot of the time I've found that I'm trying to encourage people to push themselves more, particularly as they age. I call it the danger of safety. I've talked about it a lot. People will avoid things that they think might get them hurt, like sprint intervals. And as we age, the ceiling on what we are allowing ourselves to do physically will gradually come down. Every year we will say, I don't do this because I don't want to get hurt. I don't want to do that because I once got hurt doing that. This is a really, really insidious problem that restricts us as we age, and as we age we do less and less and less. And sprint intervals regularly is a really good way to kind of give the middle finger to our aging body and say, you are going to work as hard as you can. You're going to run a sprint as fast as you're going to sprint the same way you did when you were 13 years old and you were playing soccer, right? Like, we are going to have max efforts until the day that we croak. And I think psychologically, it's really helpful to do that. Particularly the older you get, the more important it gets. You have to be careful doing that. I would argue that you have to be careful doing anything, and you have to be wary of being too careful. But you do have to make sure that your body is prepared for it. If you haven't done sprint interval training in 6 years, you should not go out and do it today as fast as you can and do 6 sets of 1 minute at max effort pace, right? You should ease into that, and you should probably have a professional help you. But you should have that as your agenda, that you can run as fast as you want for periods of 30 to 60 seconds a few times. So then it just leaves the how. Like, how would we do it? So there's different sprint interval workouts that you can do. Obviously, some of the ones that we use will tend to focus on 10 out of 10 effort, or at least 9 out of 10 effort. So we are running as fast as we can for the prescribed interval. The interval will be less than 1 minute long, right? Because you can't sprint for longer than a minute, right? Your sprinting top end speed is going to be restricted to less than 60 seconds. Once you go further than that, longer than that, nobody can hold their top speed for longer than that. So we want to be having a sprint interval that's only 30 seconds or 60 seconds. If you're doing track workouts for this, we're thinking 30 meters, 50 meters, 100 meters, 200 meters, those kind of distances where you really can run as fast as your body can actually move. And then I like to put in a long recovery. So rather than having a longer work period with a short rest interval, so you're getting gradually more tired, I like to give like a 1 to 2 work to rest ratio. So you're going to be sprinting, let's say, for 30 seconds and resting for 1 minute. And then you might be repeating that like 6 times or 12 times or something like that. Or we might be doing a 1 minute all out sprint followed by a 2 minute rest. And the idea here is that we're trying to give enough rest so that the next interval you are able to run just as fast, because we want to tap in. We want to have the opportunity to move the fastest that we can move. So we don't want you getting gradually slower every interval because you're not recovering from the last one. We want you to recover and then hit the top pace that you can hit again. And then how often? Like, sprint intervals usually, for me and the runners that we're working with, it's very, very rare that we'll do it more than once in a week. And we'll usually only do it for 4 to 8 weeks at a time. And then we might sprinkle periods like that 1 or twice a year. That's the kind of volume and periodization. Obviously, when you do it depends on when your races are and all of that kind of stuff, but that's the way we'll typically approach it. So sprint intervals are awesome. They will make you a faster runner. They will make you less likely to get injured. They will help you live a longer, happier, healthier life, and you should be doing them no matter how old you are, how young, how old. You need to be doing sprint interval training regularly. And hopefully today's episode has given you a little bit of thought about how to approach that. If you've been avoiding sprint interval training because you felt a little bit unsure about going as fast as you can and you're worried about getting injured. What I would say is that you need to be strong enough, resilient enough, capable enough to do that. And that's your best protection from injury and disability. So if you don't feel capable of doing sprint intervals because you're worried you might get hurt, then you should do something about that. You should become stronger, more capable, increase your capacity. And if you want help doing that, that's what we're all about. And we don't care if you're 42 years old or 92 years old, right? There's always room for improvement. The way we approach it would be different, but either way, you should be looking to get sprint intervals back in your life. So if you want some help on that, just click the link in the description as usual. We'll have a chat. So we might be able to help you.